Okay. Well, this morning we continue the story of Lazarus, 11th chapter, Gospel of John. We noted last week that this is the final public ministry of Jesus' earthly ministry. Final time that he does a public ministry. The only other miracle left is the when he puts Malchus' ear back on in the Garden of Eden. But this is the last miracle that we see in this time. And so this miracle is done at a strategic time. It's Passover time. Coming up to Passover, people are making their way to Jerusalem for the Passover. And this is at the home of Mary, Martha, Lazarus. They're on the road that is just outside of Jerusalem, a couple of miles, the road that comes from Jericho. And so it's a busy place. A lot of people making their trek into the city and going right by the front door. And so everyone that would come that way, they're going to hear about this miracle as they stop and they get water and they talk to friends and families gather and they're going to, did you hear about? and they're going to declare this miracle. The raising of Lazarus strengthened the faith of the disciples, right? It helped solidify the faith of the disciples to see that. The resurrection of Lazarus was it was monumental evidence of Jesus' deity. If there was any question left, that he would have power over death. And the third thing that this miracle accomplishes is it pours gas on the fire for the Jewish religious leaders. They've got to do something about him, and they've got to do it fast. He just raised somebody from the dead. The crowds are growing. His popularity is growing, and they want to end that. And there's two verses in this chapter that I want to touch base on to start with, and down in verse 25 and 26, Jesus is talking to Martha, and he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And we're going to come back to those verses, but I want to get that set in your mind first. This is the core of the miracle. This is it, believing that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. This miracle emphasizes this, and the full purpose of this gospel is here. That things are written, these things are written that you might believe that He is the Son of God, and by believing in Him have life in His name, right? That's why John wrote this gospel. And so this pulls it all together. A couple of reminders. You know, we are all going to die. We're going to die. There's nothing we can do that changes that. Ecclesiastes 8:8 says, no man has authority to restrain the wind. Today is evident of that, right? We don't have the ability to restrain the wind. So also no man has the authority over the day of death. And two, we're more just, the second thing is, well, first we're going to all die. And the other thing is, we are more than some blob of cells that's going to turn back to dirt someday. All right? There's more to us than that. We are created by God with a purpose. And so we need to remember both those things. Every human being will live forever. Every human being will live forever, right? The question is location. Location, location, location. That's important, right? There are those that receive Jesus Christ, believe in His name, and will spend that eternity in heaven. And there are those that will reject the message of Jesus Christ and spend that eternity in hell, separated from God and all that is righteous. And so we know those two things. We're going to die and that we live forever. There is a purpose. And of course, what determines that location is what we do with Jesus Christ. And that's what does it. Whether we receive Him and we receive an eternal body to dwell in His glory, or we reject Him and we receive an eternal body that will absorb punishment eternally. Here in the resurrection of Lazarus, Jesus puts on display the power of life that he possesses. Last week we were reminded there were two previous incidents where Jesus has raised somebody from the dead. There was the daughter of Jairus, right? And then there was the woman whose son had died and the funeral procession was coming through town. In both places he raised those young people to life, but both of them had happened within a matter of hours of their death. And so maybe there was some question about that. Well, this is 4 days, and that's a big deal. That really does matter, the difference. It takes away all doubt in that. And so, I don't want to get graphic this morning, but we need to just put a couple of things in your mind at what the people there are expecting. The Jews did not embalm a body, right? The Egyptians did, but the Jews didn't. The only thing they did was they would wrap the body and they would put some spices on the body, but they buried the body the same day. And that was it. And so the human body, without anything being done to embalm it or in 4 days, is not a pretty thing. The decay and the stuff that already begins and coming apart. And so, and I don't want to get graphic, but the Jews knew that. They knew that happened, and they knew some of the results that would happen with that. And so this body has been in the tomb, sealed up for 4 days. And so keep that in mind for all the people that are watching. They know what's happening. And if you want to know the details, Google that. but the body is decomposing rapidly at that point. So we see that happens, and to understand what they're seeing, this is the condition we meet Lazarus. That's the condition that he's in when Jesus arrives here in Bethany. That he's been in the tomb for 4 days. Everyone knows he's dead. Martha says down in verse 49, he says, Lord, by this time, NIV says in ice, there's a bad odor. When he says he wants him to take the stone away. If you read the old King James, it says, Lord, because he stinketh, Martha says. We don't want to take that stone away. It's been 4 days. She reminds him of that. And so that's the realities of the death these people understand. And so that helps up the stage for them to understand the miracle of what happens. That's what's going on. We're going to begin now in verse 17 then. It's where we left off last week. Verse 17, chapter 11. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He said. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? We'll stop there for the moment. Jesus is never preoccupied with his own agenda. He knows what's coming up along the way, but he comes and because he's sympathetic. He loved Lazarus. We talked about the language last week about it. It was a brotherly love. Not only did he love him with the agape encompassing love, but he loved him like a brother. It's said about Lazarus. And so it's sympathy and it's compassion, but it's also for the purpose of God, that he would come and raise this man. Remember last week he told the disciples, it's good that he is dead, because you will believe. Okay? That there's a purpose in this. There's a purpose in this happening. And so Jesus arriving, and Mary hears about him, that he's getting close, and she runs out to meet him. This is Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. If you want to see, Jesus stayed in their home. Go look at Luke chapter 10. Remember the story where Jesus is there, and Mary is sitting listening to everything that he says and absorbing him being there, and Martha's running around trying to get lunch ready and all this stuff. She said, Lord, tell her to help me. I got all this to do. And he says, hey, I'm only here for a little while. She seeks the greater things. Right now, Martha, it's good that you want to make sure everybody's taken care of, right? We all know somebody in the family that's that way, that making sure everything's just right, and there's guests here, and they're hustling and bustling all around and doing all the stuff. He says, and maybe this is something for you to, don't forget to spend some time. Don't forget to sit down and spend some time with those. Jesus is here for a little while, but we meet them, if you want to read back in Luke 10 and get that. And so Martha's there, and she comes out, and first thing she says to him is, Lord, that's good, right? Lord, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. She has faith. She's heard about Jesus healing. Over and over again, she knows about that. He's healed all kinds of diseases over and over again. And she's had to have heard about Jairus' daughter and this other young man that had been raised. But that's not in her mind. Notice there's still a little question in there or something. Because she comes and says, if you'd have been here, he would have died. Martha knew Jesus loved Lazarus. Remember when they sent the message? The message said, the one whom you love is sick. She knew that Jesus loved him, and if Jesus would have been there, he would have healed him, just like he's healed all these other people. He would have taken care of him. And she even says that God would give you what you ask. You're the Christ, the Son of God. She declares that. She knows who he is. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. And she says, I know he will rise again in the last days of the resurrection. She'd heard the story. She knew there was going to be a resurrection. Well, that's what she was thinking about. I know that, Lord, but he wouldn't have died. He'd still be here now. That was what was on her mind. But she heard this, and Jesus turns back to her, and she says, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Not, I will be. Not, it's going to happen. I am present right here in front of you. I am the resurrection and the life. And he's trying to make that clear to her. Just like he said in chapter 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? He said, I am. Not I will be. I'm going to eventually fulfill a prophecy that this will happen. I am, right here, right now. I am, that present I am. And then he tells her that, and he says, do you believe this? We struggle with that, right? It's like the old deal where the guy, you watch the guy going across the tightrope with his, the barn, he does that. That's pretty good. You see him go across the tightrope. Then you see him go and he pushes a wheelbarrow across the deal. Man, that guy is good, man. He can do anything up there. Really? Yeah. Well, then get in the wheelbarrow and let him. I don't want to do that, right? Well, do you believe that he can do that? Well, sure, I believe. I've seen him walk across there a couple times. I've seen him heal people. I've seen him do stuff, right? But I'm not quite sure when it comes to me. When it comes to this, do you believe this? How much belief? What level of belief is there? It's like the man that says, I believe, Lord, but help my unbelief. Doubts and different things can kind of crowd in, and you just can't quite fathom. My brother's been dead 4 days. I can't even wrap my mind around the fact that he might not stay in that tomb, and that's where she's at. She runs back and she gets her sister. Mary, the teacher's here. She comes out and Mary says the same thing. These two have probably wept and had this discussion. If only Jesus would have been here. If only he'd have been here, Lazarus would still be here. Because she runs out and that's the first thing she says. Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother would still be alive. Both of them have said the same thing to him. Now, you got to remember, funerals. We talked about in the Jewish tradition that they buried the body that day. They took care of the body and buried it right away. And people would come. And mourners would come, and lots of mourners would come whenever they would hear as the procession would go through, and people would gather and go. And mourners would stay in the house for at least 7 days, sometimes up to 30 days. Family and friends would be in the house mourning and weeping and showing respect because the loud mourning and weeping showed respect. As a matter of fact, if people had a lot of money, they would hire professional mourners to show how grieved they were so that everyone around would hear the wailing and mourning and weeping going on in that house. And so that's the crowd. There's a crowd gathered at that funeral around them. And it says Mary ran out to see Jesus, and the people went with her. They thought she was going back to the tomb. We need to go with her and mourn. And no, she stops at Jesus. They're all there. Lots of people are seeing all of this happen around there. It says he was troubled. He was deeply moved in spirit and in troubled. This helps reinforce and relate what Jesus feels and knows. There's humanity there. He feels the sadness. Ever be around people and you go to a funeral or you go something and maybe you don't even know really very well the person that died, but you know their family or someone, and you go and you see them in mourning. Are you touched by that? Yeah. You get it, right? And you feel hurt and sad because they're hurt and they're sad. And we feel that. Those things. Jesus felt that. He was there and he saw that with Mary and the people, it says the mourners around there. And he was overcome. He wept. Jesus wept in that. That is a... We read in Scripture that he's a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and that he knows he has in common with us all things. And we see it here. We see that emotion and those things. Jesus knows what he's about to do. To raise Lazarus from the dead, but he hurts because those around him hurt. And he hurts also, I think, because he knows what's coming for him and he knows that there's people that don't believe. He's surrounded by humanity that's confused and lost. I think there's several things that come into his hurt. But he weeps. He's desperately moved. He's troubled. He weeps. And they see how he loved him? They're right. They talked about how he loved him like a brother. His tears stood out they from the others, and then but some of them go, well, if this guy could heal a blind man, couldn't he have kept this man from dying? And the answer is, yes, he could. Jesus healed. Remember, he healed people that were far away. Remember the soldier who came and said that my son is very sick, and they found out that he was healed the same day Jesus said he'll be well. They were miles apart. When the messenger came and told Jesus, the one you love is sick, he could have just healed him right then. But there was a purpose. There's a purpose in all of this. We'll continue. We'll read the rest of the passage here, beginning then in verse 38, where we left off. Yeah, I'm in the wrong chapter. There we go. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days." Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and his feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Wow. We talked about last week all the movies and special effects and all the stuff we see that desensitizes to reality of things. These people are gathered for a funeral and they're comforting a family and mourning. This guy comes, and you've heard about all this stuff, the healing and things. Even at the point he says, "Take this stone away," there's doubt, isn't there? That's going to be bad. We don't want to do that. Are you sure? "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you'd see the glory of God?" he said. You're missing it. You're missing the deal. What I'm telling you is about to happen. And so they move the stone. I mean, this is a leap, isn't it? Think about that. What if you were standing there? Would you sit there and say, he's going to raise him up from the dead right now? Is that what would be in your mind? Or would it be like, what is going on here? Well, what an amazing thing. What that he's causing it. And remember, we said one of the purposes in that is to solidify the faith of those that believed in him. They were about to see this, and also it was going to help them a week later understand. It's only a little over a week now before he will raise from the dead. That they'll get it. They'll understand it. They'll believe it in this. And so you're going to see the glory of God, he says in that. Martha is stuck thinking about the corpse instead of thinking about the Christ. She's like, this is hard to grasp hold of. They move the stone. He says this prayer, and he says the prayer not for God to empower him, not for the Father to empower him to do this. He says, I say this prayer to help people understand where this power comes from. I say this prayer so they get the full picture, right? This isn't magic or anything that I'm doing, that power gives from you, so you'll get the glory for this. And it says he cried out in that loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Now, it's a good thing he said Lazarus. He said back in chapter 5 that there would be the day when he would call everyone, right, in that resurrection out of the grave. What if he just said, come out? Lazarus. Now, the rest of you guys hang on. I'll be back later. Lazarus, come out. There's no fanfare. There's no drum roll. It doesn't say the orchestra kicks in or the lights, big lights flash. Nothing. There wasn't even an earthquake or anything dramatic. He said, Lazarus, come out, and the man walked out. Wow. The man walked out, and he says, take off the grave clothes and let him go, right? He's wrapped up with this stuff. Take this stuff off. Wonder what would have still been in their mind. What would have been in your mind? He's standing there. What as they begin to unwrap this, what are they expecting to see? And it's Lazarus. Gosh, there had to have been a smile on his face. And Jesus is standing there face to face with him. Now, there's some other interesting things here. There's a couple of things. One of them is that question. Did he ask Martha, do you believe? She said all the right things about Jesus. Well, you're sent from God. We know you're the one that's to come. Do you believe this? He said. Do you really, really believe all of this? Or are you just repeating something you heard in Sunday school? Or is it in your heart? Do you believe this? And so that's one of the questions. And another thing that's in this passage, and another thing that's interesting, Jesus does only what God can do. When he healed somebody that was sick, man couldn't do that. Or in this case, when he calls him to life, no one else could do that. But those people that were there, he did involve them to their fullest ability. Take away the stone. Take off those grave clothes. He let the people do everything that the people were capable of doing. When he brings new life to that body that was 4 days decayed, that regenerated immediately, and there it was. He lets us participate in that process of bringing someone new life. Everything that we're able to do, for us to roll the stone away, for us to share a little bit about Jesus, for us to care about them in every way that we can, and for that new believer, that person that's new in life, for us to take the grave clothes off a little bit, to help them find their way in their pilgrimage, to grow in Christ. What an interesting parallel that only Jesus can give new life to a believer. Send His Spirit to live in their heart. But we're charged with sharing the gospel with them. We're charged with discipling and growing them up in the way. They see this incredible picture. What do you believe about Jesus? You must decide. See, the giver of life, do you believe He raised Lazarus from the dead? Are you willing to be obedient to roll the stone away? To take off the grave clothes when He calls on you to help somebody do that and grow in Christ? Share stories of your faith and encourage them along the way. God does what only God can do, and He calls us to do other things that help along that way. There's a lot of interesting things in here. Do you believe, and are you willing to do what He calls you to do? Father God, we are amazed by this passage. Father, it is amazing to try to grasp hold of. But Father, help us to believe.